Welcome to the Road by Me podcast, where we discuss where you have been, what you have done, and where you are going with our guests. We hope to provide you, our listener, a new perspective and person to connect with. Today, we have an absolutely incredible guest, Chief Bookman. He is one of my favorite people on Instagram. How are you today, man?
Amazing. Thank you for having me. How are you?
I am absolutely sensational. I purposefully don't actually give an introduction outside of saying how amazing you are. I mean, I say that about everyone, but you in particular, you have a special gift and a special calling. So I'd love if you took a minute to introduce yourself to the people, let them know what you've done and what you're doing.
Absolutely. My name is Jonathan Beatty. I go by Chief Bookman on social and in real life as well. I am on a mission to end illiteracy. Originally from Hazard, Kentucky, grew up in the South. I attended the University of Kentucky and got into corporate finance. And somewhere along my journey, a friend of mine told me about how many kids don't have books in their homes. They are unable to read by fourth grade, and what that means from a statistical standpoint in terms of poverty and crime and violence, etc. And I think this was about 2015. And since that day, that moment, actually, I have really dedicated my life to changing the world through the power of books. My company is I Love Books, and kind of special announcement now, we've actually converted into an official nonprofit organization. So that will be
Wow.
coming out to the masses here soon. But
Wow.
originally came out with a brand. I Love Books. Every product sold provides a new book to a child in need. We've given thousands of books over the last 2 years since we've been up and moving, and there are millions of more to go. So that's a little brief intro, and I'm sure we'll get into some of the other details that happened in this 10-year span or so.
For sure. I mean, I just want to say it's an incredible like it's an incredible thing to carry or boat to carry in this way. You
Mhm.
hear about people wanting to make changes, whether it be in school and other things, but I've not really heard the call to action around like illiteracy
Mhm.
and even like what some of the far reaching like pain points end up being, especially for kids that are growing up. I mean, do you know what some of like the percentages or like just how much this actually affects the world? Or at least in the country?
Yeah. So going to literacy in general, we take it for granted. Those of us who know how to read and write and think critically, we've been doing this like clockwork since we were kids.
Mhm.
And it never registered to me that people didn't have the ability to read and write until I was out in California. So I was in Cali, I was working. Actually saw a lady that was eating out of a trash can, and at the time I was working for a Fortune 10 company, and I felt this desire to do something about it, which led me into learning more about homelessness and our houseless brothers and sisters, which then led to finding out the statistics, and some of those are as follows. So 67% of kids in low income homes don't have access to a single book. 85% of Black children in the United States do not read on grade level. That stat is over 90% for Black boys in particular. When someone is unable to read, it is much more likely they will end up in poverty, and the juvenile system, the prison system, etc. So 85% of our kids who are in the juvenile system are functionally illiterate. 70% of inmates are functionally illiterate. So it's a direct correlation. And given my background is in finance and problem solving, it became very clear to me, one, we've got to get books in the hands of kids, and two, we have to help people become more literate so that they are able to be autonomous in this game of life. So that's some of the stats that I think are important. I mean, if you go into the impact on poverty, you'd find the same. Going to the impact on the actual economy, that gets billions of dollars that affects the US by itself. So, way more than that globally, just by someone not being illiterate. It should be, in my opinion, the civil rights issue of our time. And I am committed to doing what I can to make sure we have a more literate world for not just our kids, but everybody.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you a question because a lot of kids go to school, right?
Hmm.
So, I think, I don't know what the stat is, but I do think the majority of children in Western culture are in some kind of school. So
Yes.
it seems like the school system in some way has almost not empowered, but enabled a failure of sorts. How is it that, I guess, with schooling, is this possible? But then secondarily, how can you combat it if technically 8 hours is being spent in a space where the children should be learning? And like, obviously you can give them books, but if they can't read, like, how are you actually able to support them in this process?
Yeah, so the school system is so I almost look at it like this. In Kentucky, and I'm sure in other states as well, we have what's called kindergarten readiness. It's
Okay.
essentially your ABCs and counting to 20 and small things like that that a 5-year-old should be able to do by the time they enter kindergarten. Half of kids in Kentucky are not kindergarten ready. So it's before they even get to school, they're already behind, which begs the question, why are they behind? The first is awareness.
Hmm.
So a parent who believes that learning starts at school doesn't send their child there ready because they believe that they're supposed to start learning when they get into the classroom. So that's number one.
Hmm.
The impetus for that in a lot of cases is literacy or illiteracy is a cyclical and a generational issue. So if I'm an illiterate parent, then odds are my child is more likely to be illiterate because I don't know that it's of the highest of importance. B, I may not have the resources because I'm at the mercy of this engine, this economic engine that's going where I can't earn as much as someone with a master's or a doctorate. And so before we even get into school, it is an awareness problem. So even going to my goal on social media and my goal in collaborating with different organizations here in Kentucky, it's really to raise awareness. So
Hmm.
that to me is step number one. As it relates to the school, there's a couple of different things that are happening. One, some schools are just fundamentally better than other schools.
Hmm.
And so if you are living in a high income area, the chances are you're going to have higher tax dollars and you're going to be in a better school. If conversely, if you are in a lower earning area of the city or country, state, whatever you want to use as a metric, you are likely to have less resources in your school and less books in your classrooms, less libraries around the corner, etc. So it really becomes a visible impact from, I don't want to say capitalism per se, but it's economics. And that's what I studied in undergrad and in grad school. So to me, it's a multifaceted, multi-layered issue that begins with understanding that there is an issue. Someone like me who's working in corporate, who's not in education, I was not in the social space, I was just doing my job. I wouldn't have known if someone who did know told me. I have no reason. I don't have kids. I'm not married. It's not a topic of conversation. So my goal is to bridge that gap so that people like me, people like yourself, people who are successful in whatever ventures they are pursuing, they can not only become aware, but also inspired to do something about the problem, whether that's spending time, donating, raising awareness with me and other organizations that are doing that. That's really the way that I look at it. The secondary part of that, in terms of the schools, they were teaching in a way that is now being recognized as ineffective. So when we were growing up, and I don't know your age, so forgive me if there's a big gap, but I would assume that you were growing up and you may have heard hooked on phonics and talking
Hmm.
about phonics and sounding
Hmm.
words out.
Hmm.
They went away from that, and there was a lot of money made when that happened because of the books and the curriculum that was being pushed out. And now that's kind of coming back with the science of reading. So the big topic now, not only here in Kentucky but across the US, is the science of reading, and really getting into phonics and phonemic awareness and understanding the actual process of a human being learning how to read. So that's really the vantage point that I take, and hopefully that is helpful in getting some additional context.
That's incredible. I mean, I didn't even realize that they moved away from that. I remember Hooked on Phonics as like an actual show
Hmm.
or something that I watched. So, like the phonetic breakdown of words is what kind of helps you understand meaning of words that maybe you've never heard before,
Hmm.
because you may understand the roots of the words as well as like what that ending means. And it's like, I mean, I don't know. English is kind of crazy. I was talking to someone about it the other day. It's like it's like the joke I hear all the time is it's like three languages dressed up as if it's one language, because there's a lot
Yes.
of stuff that doesn't make any sense. Like
None.
Kansas, Arkansas. Depending upon also, one thing I've definitely overlooked is that there are words that all sound the same but are spelled different, and you have to understand the context of the conversation to actually know what the meaning is that someone's deriving. And so I can take for granted, if I'm having a conversation with someone and I use a word that's just normal in my vocabulary, and they only know that word to mean one thing, they may completely misunderstand everything I'm saying because they didn't realize that there is a multiple spellings of this word, and those multiple spellings all have different contextual meanings. And it's no easy task to actually understand it if it's not taught to you early on. So that's incredible to hear that. I mean, I just never even thought about the fact that people may not be able to do that. It's really deep. Let me ask you another question. In this case, then, is there a different solution for the different spaces that children are in? Like as opposed to being in 10th grade and maybe being illiterate, as opposed to like being in third grade and being illiterate, or is there like different opportunities or solutions for those different groups? Like what's that kind of look like?
Great question. So statistically speaking, if a child starts out learning how to read, and by fourth grade, they should be reading to learn. So when you and I read a book, we're not learning how to read it. We already know how to do that. We're acquiring that information through the words that we're reading. Unfortunately, and that's why the whole fourth grade reading on grade level by fourth grade is so important, because if you don't do that, it becomes significantly harder to recover. There are adult literacy programs and resources out there, but it is much more difficult. So the goal should be to have every child reading on grade level by fourth grade, so that we don't even get to the 10th grade and 12th grade. And by the way, that happens much more than what it should. And this is how we have a lot of functionally illiterate adults who may be able to read small words, but they wouldn't be able to go to a store and look at a packaged goods with all of the names and see the ingredients and read it out because they look so crazy. Going back to something that you said, if I may, because I don't want to lose that thought. So one of the challenges that was happening in the school system before, the way that they were teaching was almost like context clues. So they would put a purple, like an example would be, you have a picture in a book and it's a purple horse. So if they want you to learn the word purple, they would say, this horse is fill in the blank. But it's not teaching you how to actually read and understand the context of what you're reading. And that's where the phonics, you want the child to be able to spell the word purple, not guess it. And so I wanted to make sure I touched on that, because the question would be, well, what did they go to when they left phonics and really focusing on the phonemic aspect? So yeah, I mean, there's tools for adults and there's tools for children. My goal is to focus on early childhood and early childhood education. I think that if we get that right, the rest of it will not, there won't be anything else to solve.
Mhm.
And that's really the focus of my work.
That's incredible. So if I understand this correctly, your point is that if a child isn't able to read at that at least fourth grade reading level by fourth grade, at that point, the preconception of the learning is that you actually are able to now learn from the reading. It's not
Hmm.
that you can't read the words. So what ends up happening is I guess what it sounds like is in math class and science class and history class, you're struggling to even grasp the words. And so now you're falling behind in other subjects because the baseline of reading is not grasped. And so from that point on, you're only falling farther and farther behind because the baseline isn't set. And so, I mean, maybe you're guessing, and maybe to some extent what you were describing, right? You learned to guess by the
Hmm.
way that you learned the language of English. And so now you're in some ways guessing, and you may be guessing right or wrong, but not actually understanding the context as to why you're wrong because you don't even really understand the questions that you're being asked. Am I saying that back right?
You didn't just say it right. You said it in a sensational way.
No.
It yeah, absolutely. I mean, and think of it this way too, like that's just the scientific, like academic aspect. The more impactful aspect to me and what I've seen in classrooms and in book clubs that I've managed over the last couple of years, I've seen a child who is in um, you know, eighth grade reading a fourth grade book and they can't read it. That destroys a child's confidence. So now it's not even that they can't do something, they're not interested in learning how to do it. And once they see that their peers can do something, now this is when you start acting out because you don't want anyone to know that you can't read. So you get kicked out of the classroom. You get labeled to go into different classrooms away from all the other students. A lot of these other social things happen as a result, which is why 70% of our inmates are functionally illiterate.
Hmm.
If I just take a normal scenario, I can't read, I get kicked out of class, I don't get a high school diploma, or I do get a high school diploma, but I can't do anything in terms of skilled work. What are my options? What am I going to do? Like we live in a capitalist society. We live in an economic driven system. If you can't read and write, the odds of you being able to create significant value are slim. So
Right.
now I have to go get it the other way. I've got two kids to feed
Right.
and I've got to survive. So this is what I observe at the higher level, like the social level, beyond just the classroom and the fact that kids can't read. It's much deeper than that. And I look at literacy, it's almost like a tree, and you've got illiteracy at the root, but there's all these other issues that spring from it. So if we really get literacy right, we will naturally have less crime. We will naturally have less violence. We will naturally have more income going to a diverse group of people. These things will naturally fall in place, but we have to get that part right first.
Right, right. That makes sense. I mean, like you're basically even pointing this out that a child would rather act out and then be in a situation where like they're seen as a problem child than to be found out that you can't read. And in general, if that is what you're learning as a context when you're younger, you're just going to continually fight to hide that you can't. And so people might start to identify other problems and think that you have anger issues or whatever it is. But
Mhm.
really, the truth is the baseline that no one has any idea of is that the child is fighting to just not be found out of the inability to read. And I can imagine that carrying on into any job that they have, like, hey,
Mhm.
I remember, I used to work at McDonald's way back. And when I worked there, there were a few people there who didn't speak English super well, but they just
Mhm.
like memorized the menu. But whenever they did a major change to the menu, then there were these challenges that like you realize they didn't really understand it per se. It was just they could memorize it well enough that then it was good. So then if we had a major shift to the menu, I found myself helping people a lot because my baseline was, of course, I know what the word is. So like, yeah, it's a McChicken or a number six or whatever the case is. Now number six isn't the same thing. So the
Mhm.
memorization breaks the cycle. And then now I guess I could see that for this person, in this case, they can't read. They're going to act out to make sure, whatever. I don't even need this job. That's what they learned when they were in school. So like for the job, it's like, whatever, like, fine, cool, I'm done. You guys
Yep.
are going to change the system. I'm out. Oh, I
Yep.
guess he really didn't want a job. Well, no, it just was that he never had the opportunity to learn to read, So I never thought about that. Let me, I want to shift to this. So how are you actually doing the support for the kids at this younger age? Like how is the company actually supporting them?
Great question, and you're spot on with that example. That's actually a really good example in a real life. I mean, and it happens in all kinds of different ways that we wouldn't think of because it's not a major topic of conversation. So when I started I Love Books, my goal was to ensure all children had access to books they love. Like that's it. I want every child to have their own library. I want every library to be fully stocked with all types of books. Like my goal is to at least have access. So that's the first part. And statistically speaking, if you a child that has books in their home is much more likely to become a reader. If they see their parents reading, they're likely to become a reader. If their parents talk to them and read with them and to them, they're readers. So on one hand, we're getting the books to them. That's number one. Number two, I am focusing on raising awareness. So I talk to parents a lot. I talk to communities a lot. I go into classrooms and I read. So it's important for not just brown and black kids to see a black man reading. That's one thing in itself. But white kids need to see the same thing. And kids of other backgrounds need to see the same thing, because there's a narrative that black people don't read. There's a narrative that black men are ignorant and aren't intelligent. And so if you're one of those kids, then you can easily fall into this idea that, oh yeah, it's normal that I can't read, and or you don't hold yourself accountable or have that high expectation of yourself. So the presence in itself is of value. What i am currently doing, because this is something that I was working back with the Department of Education here in Kentucky with, is what's called decodable books. So when we're talking about phonemic awareness, what a decodable word, or if you're decoding a word, you are breaking it down, similar to what you were saying earlier. So if I'm looking at the word fraction, I'm going to start with fr, that's the thing, and then ah, and then shun, like, and so that's decoding a word. We do that all the time. And a lot of us, to your point earlier, we already know what the word is. So we're not actively decoding, but that's what you're doing. Decodable books are for kids specifically to let them read on their own earlier and help them understand the importance of connecting these words with these sounds. So I know what A is, but I know that if A is in front of a certain letter, then it sounds different than what it is by itself. These types of books are not as popular as traditional children's books, but they are super effective. And as the state and as the country begins to shift back into the science of reading, we will be there to provide those books that kids can read on their own, and become a source of not only decodable but diverse decodable books.
Mm.
And when I say diverse, I don't just mean by race. I'm talking about every facet of diversity, and really just opening kids up to like the world that exists beyond what they may see on a day-to-day basis.
Wow. It's interesting. I do a lot of reading of studies, and I remember I read a study about how they showed that in some of the curriculum, children would get questions wrong because they didn't understand what was being described. So, like,
Mhm.
if they had never themselves seen, I don't know, like a country club or something like that, they're caught up on the idea of the country club and unable to actually answer the math question. And
Mm.
so, the cultural aspect sometimes of teaching someone something, what I think what I think ends up happening for us is we forget that our perspective is based on a past that we have. So if someone introduces a new idea in the midst of introducing a new idea, you can end up taking away from the idea that you're trying to communicate to someone because they don't, like, they're trying to grasp two ideas at the same time. It's
Whew,
like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, hey, if
brilliant.
Joey has three hockey sticks and then he adds three more hockey sticks, how many hockey sticks does the kid have? And the kid might be looking at, like, what are hockey sticks? Like,
What's a hockey stick?
right, what's a hockey
Yeah.
stick? Or like what's a golf club? Or what's
Yep.
a whatever, an animal that maybe you're not aware of. So there's a trick in trying to make sure that culturally the child understands, so they're only trying to grasp one idea instead of two at the
Mm.
same time. And then
Mhm.
the second thing that's interesting is it's interesting that we moved away from teaching children reading in the way that you actually teach children language. I read a study about how they were able to look at parents talking to their children, and they found that parents unconsciously basically would find a way to speak to their child almost in a grade level above where the child was. And that's what ended up consistently helping the child to grasp more baseline sounds. But it seems to be rooted in us as a, like, in every generation. Like, it doesn't matter where you are culturally, it's like this consistent concept of the child doesn't quite understand the sound, so you start to, like, you almost subconsciously keep helping carry the child across in understanding language. It's funny that in our infinite knowledge, we decided we were going to start teaching reading opposite of how we teach language. And then sure enough, it ends up not working out as well. But it's really cool to hear. Just like, I just never was aware of any of this. It's really amazing to hear from you. Let me, I'm sorry I went on that rant, but I wanted to ask this question. Do you have goals in the next, like, year, 3 years, 5 years for the company? Maybe like a vision of where you guys want to be at these points?
Yeah, I mean, the number one goal is to provide the highest value decodable books that exist in the United States. That's the first goal. Second goal is to ensure that those books are going to kids who need it most, like who actually need the assistance. And three is to make sure that everybody that has an ear or an eye understands this issue through whatever vehicles that we're able to raise awareness. I personally believe that there are a lot of people that I've worked with, and I've worked for 3 Fortune 25 companies in my career. So very fortunate to have like such a high level thinking group of people that I've worked around and worked with. They don't know this, I'm pretty sure. And they have a lot of resources. So my job is to connect those people who don't know, make sure that they do know, and then tap into those resources, their time, their talent, their treasure, and become like the not the leader, but a leader in this space, not for the sake of being a leader, but for the sake of pushing this mission forward. So there's some smaller things that will get us there that I would consider goals, but I would think that that's really it. Like in 3 years, I want when people think of decodable books, I want them to think of I Love Books. And if a parent is going to purchase decodable books, I want them to be coming to I Love Books. If a group is looking to give books, I want them to come to I Love Books, and I want to ensure all children have access. That's a lofty goal. That's like a long term forever thing because there's always going to be kids who need books.
Mm-hmm.
But that is, the big idea, if you will.
That's awesome. So I normally ask this later, but I want to, now that it's in people's minds, what it is that you're working towards, what is it that we can do to support you in this process? Like what skills do people have that they could offer, or what are you looking for us to be able to serve you better to help with these goals?
The first thing is, they talk about marketing and word of mouth being the best marketing tool. Just let people know who I am. Share. If you are aware of, if you've seen me on social media or seen I Love Books on social media, just share that out. If you're interested in buying the merch before we convert the website, so I'm in the process of converting from the shop now that what someone would go to I Love Books and see now. In the next couple of months, it will look very different as we transition into more of the nonprofit space. But if someone's interested in buying some merch, I'm still selling the merch and I'm still giving the books. So that's another way. And then really talk about it amongst your family, your friends. Like make sure that you are being part of the solution. Become a reader. Read to some kids. Go volunteer. It doesn't even need to impact me directly to help me and what I'm doing. Someone at a local level could go volunteer at their local school or their library for a reading hour, and that's helpful. Take a picture of it, take a video of it, upload it, talk about books, talk about literacy. If you are a book lover, talk about that. Like I think part of it is changing the narrative and the culture. And we do that through action. We do that through the individual actions that we can take.
100%. I'm with that. And I'll definitely do my part. I already had reached out to a couple schools about supporting in other ways, but now knowing that even at a baseline, this reading is a thing. I mean, that's incredible. I wanna ask you a couple quick fire questions.
Yeah.
Who is someone that inspires you, or is the most inspiring to you?
Ooh, that is. Whew. I that's a great question. It really depends. I mean, I've been really inspired by Nipsey Hussle and Kobe.
Mm,
I know
mm.
you can see
Yeah,
Mamba
yeah.
Mentality, and
Mom
then
mentality.
Nip's book is somewhere over here. But I,
Marathon continues.
I, I think that their lives, the way that they were living their lives, really inspired me during the pandemic. In particular, I felt like, wow, if Kobe did so much in such little time, but he inspired the entire world, myself included. So I would say those are two of my greatest inspirations that are, even though, rest their souls.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I definitely, Kobe and Nip both, I think what they had in common is that they stayed true to the belief that they had,
Hmm.
to even the detriment of maybe their possibilities at a certain point. You know,
Hmm.
maybe Nip would have gotten bigger earlier if he had signed certain deals, and maybe
Yep.
Kobe would have won more championships if he had changed the way that he played. But at the end of the day, that also is what made them. And I think in the moment, it can seem like, oh, this person's not really real, but in the long term, you end up seeing that consistency like hits home more than anything, because it's like, man, like could I stay that consistent every day to show up? You know, like that is this is so incredible. Those are up there with me too, man. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, man, the marathon continue, and I think that's why people love the marathon. I was just telling my brother the other day. I think that's why people resonate with that concept. You just got to stay down. You just got to
Mhm.
stay down long enough, and it was very easy. Like my corporate career, I'm super thankful. It was awesome, and I'm very grateful. But it's a whole different animal creating something from your mind and an
Mm,
idea, which is also what I know that they've talked about actively, or they talked about actively. So yeah, I mean, creating something from nothing and staying down long enough to see it through.
100%, man. You're delusional as long as it's just you in the idea and building, but then once everybody else gets with it, all of a sudden you're the greatest, but they now can all see it too. So I
Bingo.
definitely understand it. The other question, we're already in the vein, what are 3 books that absolutely changed your life, or that are just your absolute favorites?
Yes, 3 books that changed my life. Oh my gosh. The first, and this is gonna trip people out, man. The
Okay.
Little Engine That Could. That's the
Okay.
first book.
I like
So
that.
when I was a kid, and I've thought about this a lot recently. What made me different, and it's just a belief. And I
Mhm.
remember reading that book, and it was like, I think I can, and I've held that belief all of my life, and even
Mm.
now I still hold the same belief. So while it may not it may not be the expected book that I would say, but if we're going in a chronological order, that's definitely the first book that really inspired me to believe in myself and believe that anything is possible. The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho is my favorite book of all time. I read it once a year, and it continues to inspire me and millions of people around the world. It's for the same reason, though. It's all about your mindset and how you think, and uh, believing in a dream and a vision, and actually pursuing it and being willing to die for it. Um, I will say the last book. I mean, I, I could go with Malcolm. I could go with Malcolm, but I'm actually gonna go with uh, what are we gonna go with? Last book. We'll go to the business side. We'll go with Contagious. So there's a book by Jonah Berger, and it's called Contagious. Nip actually talked about it in a couple of interviews, and it just talks about how things become important and how things go viral and how things spread in general. So his $100 mixtape came from the first one of those steps, which is it's labeled Steps,
Mhm.
and that's what he did. He went out and got people talking about this $100 mixtape because people were eating $100 cheesesteak, and so that book really changed my eyes on in terms of how to make something happen.
Mhm.
But yeah, man, I mean, three's a hard thing when you're looking at so many.
I feel that, man. That third one is one I haven't read, so I'm actually adding that to my list. So I look forward to reading that. Um, and then I guess you have talked a lot about this throughout, but I always do like to ask this question: like, what is your dream for the future of reality? Like, if you could maybe break down. I mean, you've said it in a lot of different ways, but for you, like, how would you maybe put that into words? Your dream of reality.
I want my nieces, my nephews, my godkids to grow up in a world where everyone has the ability to read, write, and think for themselves. I believe a more literate world is a better world for
Mm,
everybody.
mm,
And that's my contribution to society. And that's why I was born. That's what I'm here to do. And help kids become readers. Like, I understand it's a challenge, man. You've got technology, you got books competing with technology.
right.
And my fear is that technology is winning, and it's going to continue to win. And there's nothing wrong with tech. This tech is why we're able to do what we're doing now. So there's
Mm-hmm,
nothing
mm-hmm.
wrong with technology.
100%, 100%.
But we also can read, and we can also write, and we can also think. And if we weren't able to do that, this conversation wouldn't be happening anyway. So I think we've got to just get back to the basics. And my dream is really to help create that world in my own way.
I love that. That's incredible. I mean, I feel like honestly, that was a perfect point. I mean, I just want to say first and foremost, thank you so much for being here, Chief. You are absolutely incredible. I mean, amazing. You're sensational. I knew a lot about you before, and we've obviously been connected for a while. But I just feel like your journey and what you're building is really special. And I do want to give you a minute to be able to tell the people how they can reach you. We're going to add it in the description as well. But I do want you to be able to call out everything so that people can connect with you.
Yes, and thank you. I appreciate you. Super grateful. And if I could ever be of service, please let me know.
Of course.
Again, my name is Jonathan Beatty. On my socials, I'm primarily on TikTok and Instagram. It's
Hmm.
at Chief Bookman,
Hmm.
at I Love Books ORG. That's I Love Books ORG for the same platforms, and then ilovebooks.org. So ilovebooks.org is the website, and where you'll see some big changes coming before the end of the year, getting ready to go into 2024. So please reach out, connect. Let's talk about, you'll hear me talk about books. You'll see some of the work that I do. And if there's ever anything I can do for any of your listeners or viewers, please reach out to me. I'm happy to help serve in any way I can.
Well, man, thank you so much, Chief. You're amazing, and we look forward to staying connected. I know this won't be probably the last time that we connect like this.
Not at all. Thank you, brother. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you, man. Have a good one.
You too.